Here we are. We are in the book of Deuteronomy. Hurrah! How exciting. But it really is exciting. You'll forgive me, I'm pushing back a cold. There's a lot of new concepts and new ideas in the book of Deuteronomy. In some ways, it has parallels in some of our other books meaning Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And in many ways, it's actually completely unique and new and different. And there are many theories as to why it is. That's a lecture for a whole nother day. That's a year-long course, and we can do that another time. So perhaps what's most familiar to us in the book of Deuteronomy, what's the most important prayer that we all know that's in Deuteronomy chapter 6? Other than the cantor. Good, everyone, yes, the Shema. Very good job, cantor. You knew it too? Okay, good job, Marshall. You've been here long enough. I think it's time. So good, the Shema. Okay, here's another word that's very uniquely placed in the book of Deuteronomy, and that's love, ahava. Now, this isn't to say that we don't see ahava anywhere else. We do. We actually see it, I looked it up. We see it 15 times in Genesis, but it's between two people. Twice in Exodus, also between two people. Twice in Leviticus, love thy neighbor. We know that one. 0 in the book of Numbers. And 23 times in Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, it's between God and the Israelites. Totally new, revolutionary, and it really is and was. Another word that we see very often in Deuteronomy is joy, sameach, right? This is also kind of a new concept. Deuteronomy does this incredible thing. It takes the history, the kind of conceptual from the previous books, and turns it into the applicable. And we're going to dive a little bit deeply into what that actually means. There is no other book in the Torah that fuses theology, spirituality, morality, while simultaneously handing off of the memory that transforms into identity. And we see this as well in Moses' life. It's incredible, and I can't wait to share it with you. So I know you all remember last weekend's sermon, but I'll remind you for fun that we are right on the other side of the Jordan. We are east of the river, and we are told that we are 11 days away from entering the promised land. Mind you, we've been traveling for 40 years. We're exhausted. And as we learned last week, Gad and Reuven want to stay on the other side of the Jordan and guard the border for the Israelites as their nachala, their inheritance. So they can continue to raise their mikneh, their cattle. And Moses agrees for them to remain on the other side of the Jordan in order to keep peace with the people, even though that wasn't really part of his original plan. And so the themes of the book change. They're different now. Deuteronomy is still in narrative form like Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers. Leviticus is not. But we also see these new developments, and most noticeably the change in Moses. Moses transitions from being leader to teacher. And this change is significant, not just for him, but for us as well. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final speech before he dies, and in it he starts by recounting the history of the Israelites from slavery, accepting the commandments at Sinai, the spies, the hardship that the Israelites faced. And then he makes this huge conversion depicting the now what, right? Where do we go from here? He goes from retelling or recapping and translates our shared history into future planning and living. And in the opening verses, we're introduced to a new word that has never been used in this context, be'er, meaning to expound or to make clear. Be'er, by the way, also sounds like a well containing water, related. Yes, everything is related. And the book of Deuteronomy, this portion opens as follows. אלה הדברים אשר דיבר משה אל כל ישראל בעבר הירדן, במדבר, בערבה, מול סוף בין פרען ובין תפל ולבען וחצרת, ודי זהב 11 יום מאחריו דרך הר שעיר עד קודש ברנע. These are the words Moses addressed to all the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan, through the wilderness in the Arava, near Suf, between Far'ah and Tofel, Lavan, Chazerot, and Dizahab. Again, we're getting location. Location means significance, important. We're in a real place. And it is 11 days from Horeb, the Kadosh Barnea, by the Mount Seir route. We are 11 days away, so close. ויהי 40 שנה ב12 חודש, באחד לחודש. סדר דבר משה אל בני ישראל, ככל אשר ציווה אדוני איתו אליהם. אחרי החטאו את סיחון מלך הארמי, אשר יושב בחשבון, ואת עוג מלך חשבון, אשר יושב במהלכתו באדרי בעבר הירדן, בארץ מואב, הואיל משה באר, we're going to talk about that in a minute, את התורה הזאת לאמור, אדוני אלוהינו דיבר אלינו בחרב לאמור רב לכם שבת בהר הזה. And it was in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, that Moses addressed the Israelites in accordance with the instructions that God gave him. After he defeated Shichon, king of the Amorites, who dwelled in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, right? We're outlining the difficulties we've had to get to this moment. And on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this teaching. He said, our God, Adonai, spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have stayed long enough at the mountain. I gave myself chills. Not because of me, these words, incredible. We're here, we're there, we're about to cross. So here we are on the other side of the Jordan, and Moses undertook to expound this teaching. There's a double back-to-back verb here. Ho'il, meaning he undertook, and be'er, meaning to expound on this teaching. And we'll talk about be'er in just a moment. Ibn Ezra, who's a Spanish medieval commentator, remarks that these double back-to-back verbs, Moses took it upon himself to explain or expound because he knows he is in the presence of first-generation slaves, those who were in Egypt, but also, perhaps more importantly, the second and the third generation of Israelites who are disconnected from the slavery. They were not there for the trauma. They are inheritors of the trauma story. And some of those people weren't physically at Sinai, so he knows he has to explicate, help them draw out the meaning of this narrative that they've been living but have never actually been a part of. I'm also going to say that I'm personally drawn to the fact that in the Hebrew, it says the Moshe sits in the middle of the two verbs, right? Ho'il Moshe be'er. In my mind, there's midrash there. There's a story there, right? He is sitting in this kind of in the middle of this new role, right? They could have said it differently. They could have put the verbs together and Moshe at the end. I digress. So as I mentioned, there is this double verb, and then we have the word be'er, which is a marker for us. It's a new word. And one of the first features that flags our attention, Moses in this moment is transitioning from being their leader to teachers because he knows he can't go into the promised land with them. So what he does is he tries to set them up for success with their covenant with God. And he switches from telling them what the law is to why the law is. He is intentional when he talks about the law, and he reminds them, you were once slaves in Egypt, which is their lesson in understanding the significance of freedom and just law, which is supposed to be governed by liberty. Another unique theme in Deuteronomy, and this Torah portion in particular, is this idea of remembrance and never forgetting, which we hear repeatedly in this book. This notion of understanding our present in order to develop our future through the conduit of our past. In Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton, George Washington tells the young, haughty Alexander Hamilton, "Dying is easy, young man. Living is harder." And Moses keeps repeating this to the Israelites. Slavery is easy. Freedom is harder. This final speech, the book of Dvarim, it's unique because it's also in Moses' voice. For once, he's not transmitting the word of God to the Israelites, but rather passionately sharing the vision in his own words. And in so doing, he explains that their laws are not just for the sake of keeping the covenant with God, but they're good for the Israelites. They're good for us. These laws, the laws of the Israelites, are an exception to any law that preceded them and what other peoples and other cultures were doing around them. Every ancient civilization had gods and laws that revered these gods. But those laws were made by leading human figures like kings or pharaohs or rulers, not by the gods themselves. There's the law code of Hammurabi, for example, which is a Babylonian legal text that was composed in the 7th century before the Common Era. The laws of the Israelites were given to the Israelites by God. And this is significant because our laws demand interpretation and teaching. And this is a defining moment for Moses because he is the carrier of these laws and the leader, and was the leader of these people for so long. And moving forward, he will not be with the Israelites physically. So now he becomes transmitter and teacher as a way to help them establish themselves intellectually and spiritually. He sets them on the right path. Moses goes through his own passage as guide into teacher. And becoming teacher is not just about bringing the people to where they need to be like a leader, but first meeting them where they are in that moment and securing lifelong ability to move forward in growth. It's not about reaching a destination now. Now it's about dwelling in the process. The physical destination of reaching the Holy Land was all but reached. They were there physically, just 11 days away. The spiritual, emotional, and faithful journey was just beginning. And it is very shift that made our tradition achievable, not only in their time, but in all time. And it's an important moment in our tradition and also an important lesson for us. We are creatures of habit. Like it or not, we are comfortable in what we know. Growing, stretching, deviating from what we're acclimated to is really hard to move away from. But sometimes what we are accustomed to are the things that no longer serve us. How do we find the mental and emotional strength to have awareness to change those things about us? If we're lucky, we have coaches and therapists or friends and family that we have these intimate conversations with. And if we don't partake in these kind of conversations with others, then we have to find ways to be self-aware. Moses' lesson is significant, not just for him, but for us. Had he become teacher, who knows? Had he not become the teacher, who knows if we would have still been here? Had Jewish continuity. We are here because Moses had the courage to take a step back and recognize that he needed to change his role. What does it take? What kind of courage and self-awareness does it take for him, or really any of us, to stop in our tracks and to say, maybe it's time for me to pull back or do something really differently? This is a lesson in continuity and self-awareness. And we all want to feel needed in a way that makes us feel good. The question is, are we doing what's best for everyone, including ourselves? And this gives us insight into accountability and bravery. We learn from Moses that deviating from our comfortable place is sometimes more important and courageous than remaining where we are just because it's what we do or what we're accustomed to. More times than not, stepping back is not a loss, but a necessity to help us fulfill a new role, a sometimes more important role, sometimes even a better role. Moses' step back was towards teacher, which led the Israelites forward, leading all of us to this moment today. Shabbat Shalom.